Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja of Bloomberg Quick Take, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation, which is focused on walking the talk and sort of how companies can really put their money where their mouth is and show that social justice issues matter to them. And so I'm excited to bring into this panel the following guests, and I'm just going to bring them right in. Crystal Barnes, she is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility and ESG at ViacomCBS. We also have Chris Miller here with us. He is the head of Global Activism at Ben & Jerry's. And also Celia Ouellette calling us from London today. She's the founder and CEO of the Responsible Business Initiative for Justice. So thank you all for being here. So much to talk about. And I really sort of want to start with what we're seeing here in the U.S. We are seeing a debate happening right now on voting rights. We saw the president yesterday call this an assault on democracy, and he was referring to a lot of the bills that are making their way in legislatures across the country. Chris, I wanted to start with you. Ben & Jerry's prioritizes voting rights. I'm curious, where does the company stand on what's happening right now?
I think we're profoundly concerned about the attempt in states around the country to roll back access to the ballot box and to voting rights. We have seen a steady progress over decades here in the United States of expanding the franchise, making it easier for people to vote. In my home state of Vermont, we have just put legislation in place that provides for mail-in balloting and voting for all citizens of the state. So I think we are very concerned and think that there is a special role that business leaders and companies need to play in defending against the rollback of voting rights and voter access.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. Crystal, I want to get your take. Where does the private sector come in on an issue like voting rights? It's facing an uphill battle with Congress, but where does the private sector come in here?
Yeah, I mean, as you can imagine, it influences our audiences, our employees, all of the stakeholders that we have as a media company. And so for us, it's important to whatever statements or point of views or perspectives that we put out there, that we're able to back them up, right? We take that very seriously. So whether it's infusing, for example, this past election, content and insights around voting within our content. How do we truly leverage the content that we produce to ensure that our audiences have the information that they need to take the appropriate action? And that's the role that we play as a media and content provider, is just really leveraging the voice that we have and the reach of the audiences that we touch to ensure that they have the tools and resources that they need to do what they need to do at the polls and with all voting.
And Chris, where does Ben & Jerry's sort of take their stance, and what is it that Ben & Jerry's is looking to do on this issue?
I think we work on a number of issues, but for the last 5 or 6 years or so, we have been focused on issues around systemic and structural racism in the United States. I think when you look at the legislation that is being considered and in some cases has passed in some states, you're seeing legislation that at least the outcomes are such that they will tend to disproportionately impact low-income people and people of color. And so it is our commitment to social justice and the work that we have been doing to highlight and ultimately confront the systems and structures that perpetuate racism in the U.S. that compels us to oppose this kind of legislation. And I will just briefly say, I think the landscape is shifting on these issues, that the expectations on corporations and brands to sort of match the work that they're doing inside their businesses with becoming a part of addressing some of these issues that we're wrestling with in society. And I think consumers' expectations is that companies need to be playing a role in helping solve some of these problems that our society struggles with, including voting rights.
Yeah. Right. And Celia, I want to bring you in here because you are someone who is working with companies a lot of times and dealing with when they're going to decide to speak out, how they're going to speak out, and as Chris was saying, how they're actually going to back up what they're saying. What is that process like? And how do you talk to companies who maybe are a little bit hesitant to speak out?
Yeah, I think, just to echo what Chris just said, there's such an increased expectation on businesses to do that. We've seen this a lot in the last year and a half, especially. There was a data study conducted last year which said that 60% of consumers now believe that silence is not an option for businesses. So we're definitely in this place where businesses have to find their voice. In terms of like what this looks like, this looks like a lot of partnership with the campaign organizers and advocates that are working on the ground. And I think the companies that are doing this very, very well and are speaking with authenticity and credibility are those companies. I've had the great fortune of working with Ben & Jerry's that are taking their cues from the campaigners and organizers who have been working on these issues for years and years. These are companies that really recognize that, the right message at the right time to the right person said in the right way is going to create this huge change for campaign organizations, but they're actually listening to those campaign organizations on what that messaging is, when it should be given, to whom should it be said. And I think that partnership is where we're seeing a considerable impact by businesses and a really kind of powerful impact by businesses.
How do you tread that line, though? I mean, Ben & Jerry's is a company that's been speaking out for a number of years, but how do other companies tread that line? Celia, I want to get your take, and then Crystal, maybe you can weigh in on sort of Viacom's impact.
Yeah, I think the work that we do, businesses are at various stages. There's some companies that we're working with that aren't actually ready to even speak out yet. They're still at the point where we're bringing directly impacted people and people from the campaign level into their companies to talk to their leadership about what engagement looks like. With some companies, we're at the planning stage where they're trying to figure out what their voice is, what their identity is, what issues they're going to speak out on. And then, I think I work on criminal justice, as you know, in the US, and I think there's so many different components to criminal justice, whether there's a human rights focus or whether it's extreme sentencing or whether it's something very workforce connected like Clean Slate, which literally is getting people back to work when they have criminal convictions. And I think that businesses can, to a certain extent, pick the issues that they think fit their identity from a menu of issues that are all supportive of racial equity in this country. So, I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all approach for businesses. For a company like Ben & Jerry's is willing to take on issues that other companies aren't. But I think taking on zero issues is not an option. I'm happy for you to pick an issue that really resonates with your identity as an organization. But, you've got to pick at least one, and preferably two or three.
I think that's exactly right.
Crystal,
you have to pick the issues that identify with your brand, but the issues where you know that you can make an impact, right? So
Yeah.
for us, it was about, we had a campaign last year, Vote for Your Life. We knew that getting folks to actually work the polls and to power the polls was important, right? And so we were able to focus our energy, our audiences, our voices, our people, our power into that message across all of our brands. So it's really about picking the issues around the big issue that you know that your brand can have an impact on, that you can have a measurable difference in. You'll be able to see the impact after a certain period of time. That's the important piece of it to me for brands. Don't try and boil the ocean. Do what's authentic to your brand, but that will directly connect to your audiences in a way that will influence impact.
Yep.
Chris, how does Ben & Jerry's decide when to speak out on an issue? There's a number of social justice issues that are out there that we can talk about, but there's also some issues that get brought up. When we look at sort of the climate of the world right now and sort of where things are at. How do you and your team sort of come up with the statements and when to speak out?
It's the question we're probably asked more than any other question, and it's more art than science. I think we work with a constellation of progressive partners and allies. And I think, to Celia's point, the work that we do is led by our civil society NGO partners. We aren't we aren't policy experts. We don't pretend to understand the best way to reform the criminal legal system in the United States. We do know, however, who knows the answer to those things, and those are the people that we work with. So I think what we've come to understand is that as a consumer-facing brand, we have a unique set of advocacy tools, if you will, that are different than many of the civil society NGO partners that we work with. And that in many ways, those tools that we use to sell pints of chocolate chip cookie dough and Chunky Monkey can also be used and put in service with our partners to sell ideas, to help people understand that climate change is an existential threat to humanity, that the criminal legal system in the U.S. disproportionately impacts people of color, and provide ways for people to take action. So I think we look to our partners and our allies to tell us when our voice, when our reach, and when these tools can be most useful in helping push issues to a tipping point and make progress on these things that we care about.
So it's sounding like the key component is having someone like a Celia or an NGO kind of come in and guide a company. Is that right?
It is the most important part of what we do. And what I will say is I think in many cases, it's a little bit counterintuitive for companies to kind of open the doors to campaigners and activists. We have found that it is the secret to the success that we have in doing this work at Ben & Jerry's. It allows us to ensure that we're working on issues that are important, timely, and relevant, that our messaging and framing is consistent with those on the front lines and those impacted by these issues. And that's really important. And we don't preach to the choir, unlike many of our civil society NGO partners. We speak to a broad general population audience, and we can help mainstream these ideas, these policy solutions. And I think that's a really important role that we play. But being partner-led is I would say, it is the most important part of getting this work done right, I think.
Yeah. Celia, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about what Chris said that I completely agree with. I think, from the business side, number one, those businesses that are doing this really well are the businesses that have a Chris in-house. And usually, I have their phone number. They are that, I'm texting with them. They are that accessible to the kind of partners on the ground. And I think when you are a business that is thinking about what you're going to put on the table, we're talking about the issues, the menu of issues that a business might kind of decide what fits for them from. But I think businesses also should be thinking about the menu that they're going to offer to those campaign partners. And for me, that kind of roughly divides into three categories. The first is helping those campaigners achieve systemic change. And that looks like, honestly, committing a percentage of your government affairs budget and staff to supporting those campaigners on the ground and creating policy change. We can go, my background is I'm a lawyer, so I could work on one case at a time, or I could change a law and not require any of my colleagues to work on those cases because they don't exist anymore, because we've ended juvenile life without parole, or we've ended the death penalty, or we've made it automatic for people to have their record expunged when they have the right to have their record expunged. So we're not doing expungement petitions. Systemic change is huge, and businesses have this incredible tool already built at their disposal that they simply need to offer to the campaign community. The second is narrative change. If businesses are looking, again, if we're talking about metrics here, a percentage of their marketing and communications budget that they can offer to campaigners to provide that mega platform. We partnered up, Jennifer, last time we spoke, we were launching a campaign with Richard Branson. I'm telling you, Richard Branson's tweets get a lot more retweets than my tweets do. Richard has a considerable platform, and he is willing to give a portion of that platform over to really important campaign organizations. And then the third is looking internally within your own company, looking at what you're investing in, looking at where you're getting supplies from, where your partners are sourcing from, and looking at who your employees are. And so in my work in the criminal justice field, that would be, are you hiring people with criminal convictions? Are you sourcing from places that don't use prison labor? Are your investments avoiding the prison industrial complex? That's the very, very skinny version of this. But you could replicate that model of systemic change, narrative change, and internal policy practices for pretty much any issue out there.
Yeah, and Crystal, I want to bring you in here because ViacomCBS is obviously a media company, and Celia was just talking about the narratives that you can put out there, but also internally, I wonder, how is ViacomCBS sort of backed up the messages that they're putting out there? And I mean internally, but also externally too, right, with some of the platforms that you're publishing content on?
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, BET launched this initiative called Content for Change. And for us, it was all about how do we leverage the three C's, right? How do we leverage our content that's being created? How do we leverage the creative supply chain and life cycle? And then how do we leverage our culture? Right. And so, and to
Mhm.
do all of that around combating racism, bias, and negative stereotypes within our content. So it's sure, it's about the output that you see when you turn on the TV and you view our content across our networks, but it's about the behind the scenes. What's happening across that creative supply chain? To Celia's point, what's happening with the partners that we implore to create some of this content? What are the expectations around DE&I with our talent and with our people that have hands on that content that gets created? And so it's about ensuring that you have kind of like a full circle infrastructure around that content so that it's wrapped in the DE&I expectations and standards and quality that you're looking for in the outfit. Ultimately, that is what will have systemic change. That is what will change the narrative within our communities, our families, our homes, with our friends. And that is what we will consistently continue to look at as we look at our entire creative life cycle, just making sure that it's infused into that process.
And we have a question from the audience, which, Crystal, maybe you can speak on, and then we can get all of your take. Someone's asking, do you allow your employees to vote on issues or petition for an issue to be focused on? Of course, we're living in a time where a lot of people are passionate about issues. Crystal, I'm curious from ViacomCBS perspective, where does the company stand on this?
Yeah, so we, like many companies, last year had a lot of activity around just encouraging employees to get out and vote. So, whatever that means, and facilitating that for them in a way that was seamless with their families and with everything else that was going on. And so, absolutely, I mean, we encourage our employees to get out there and to get active. We encouraged and actually provided volunteer hours and time for them to actually go to the polls and work the polls. We kind of wrapped a program around that because we realize our employees are one of our most valuable assets. And we want to make sure that they're equipped with everything that they need to exercise their civic duty and to get involved, very similar to the messages that we share with our audiences and other stakeholders.
And I'm curious, for all of you, what if an employee doesn't agree on the stance that a company is taking? Chris, maybe we can start with you, because Ben and Jerry's, as we mentioned, is very vocal. How do you tread that line?
The issues that we work on, the policies that we support, the statements that we release are not a byproduct of a sort of internal consensus with employees. They're sort of deeply rooted in the values of the company. And as you know, our company was founded by two guys, Ben Cohen, Jerry Greenfield, and the values of our company very much reflect the values of our co-founders. So when we take a position on an issue, there are always people who disagree with us. But rooting that point of view in these deeply held values that are the foundation of our company mean that you can disagree with us, but it's hard to suggest that we're sort of misappropriating our consumers' values, or we're sort of latching onto something because it feels popular. What I will say is we work really hard to bring our employees along on these issues that we're working on. We've been working on issues of criminal justice reform and police reform, and we have an ongoing series of engagement opportunities for our employees to really dig into these issues. So I think we work hard to bring employees along on this journey. And the other thing I'll say is, we have a broad social mission. There are many ways at Ben & Jerry's in which an employee can connect to the mission of the company. It's not just about a statement that we may make in response to something that's happening in the world, but we have community grant-making committees at all of our sites where employees can be a part of making small donations to their communities. Our manufacturing site in northwestern Vermont builds community gardens for senior citizens in the community. So there are a whole bunch of ways beyond just our position on the events at the United States Capitol on January 6th that an employee can feel like they're a part of bringing the mission of this company to life.
And if you don't take a stance, oh, go ahead, Crystal.
I was going to say, and it's about providing that space for feedback, right? There are many times where our employees come to my team, whether it's a statement that we've made or wanting to, get involved in a local issue or effort connecting to some, legislation that may be coming down the pike. it's providing that runway for conversation to ensure that employees know that their voices have been heard and know that whatever decision that the company ultimately makes, they still do have the ability to activate in areas that they are interested in addition to activating against issues, as Chris mentioned, that are connected to the company's mission, vision, values, right? And so it's making sure that employees feel heard and then taking action based on that listening session.
And what happens if you don't take a stance? I mean, I wonder, is there an impact to business? Celia, you sort of got at this a little earlier. What are the pros and cons of doing this?
Well, I mean, I think they can be pretty dire. If we give an example again from my work, Barclays Bank, a big commercial bank, big high street bank in the UK, was thrown out of a membership organization and kind of outed for investing in a private prison construction in Alabama, and the sort of reputational impact of that was profound, and they ultimately pulled out of the deal. So I would not underestimate the impact from a consumer and a public reputation perspective of failing to take action on it. And in this conversation about employee engagement, I think the sort of the feedback that you're perhaps not getting might be in whether you're losing talent or you're failing to recruit and retain talent appropriately. Referring to that same data that I talked about a little earlier in this conversation, it was just over 40% of employees, and this was within a few months of George Floyd, said that they were currently looking for a new job because they did not think that their employer was doing enough to speak out about issues of racial and social justice in America. So, and I don't know how often businesses actually get that as feedback when an employee leaves versus they just leave and they find a company that reflects their values more. But I feel like talking about the recruitment and retention, particularly of millennials, is something that I've been talking to businesses about for years. And I actually don't think it's as complicated as we sometimes think it is. Millennials do want the company they work for to have a purpose and to have a value. And I think that there's this second damage that is happening for companies that don't speak out, which is that they're losing talent and they probably don't know why.
Chris, has Ben & Jerry's ever sort of taken had a negative hit because of something that you've spoken out on?
We have taken a wide range of positions on controversial issues over the years. I can tell you for 43 straight years, this company has grown year over year. Ben had this insight many years ago that the strongest bonds and relationships you can create with your consumers, your customers, we call them fans, is around a shared set of values, right? So it's not just about a product transaction in the freezer case at the grocery store, but it's building loyal consumers and fans based around a shared set of values. So we understand not everyone agrees with us, and frankly, we don't need everyone to love us. But we have built a strong and successful business that has grown year over year by making both great ice cream, but also standing for things in the world. And I think those two things are a critical part of what makes Ben & Jerry's Ben & Jerry's.
Crystal, I'd love for you to weigh in on that too, because there's also, I mean, we've been talking about backing up what it is that you're saying, but sometimes there's a lot of doubt with what companies put out, statements they put out, right? So how do you continue to sort of foster that trust that you believe in, ViacomCBS believes in what it is that they are saying?
Yeah, and this actually goes into one of the questions around the impact seen in your business. I mean, it is about setting those measurable goals, right? So last year, we set some goals and targets around wanting 40% of our newsroom to be BIPOC, right? We set goals and targets around putting research and insight into the content that we produce, ensuring that it actually has the outcomes that we are looking for. We put resource into ensuring that there's accountability with our talent, again, and with our creative supply chain against those DE&I culture and metrics that we put forth as a company. So it truly is about ensuring that you have a North Star and that you are working collectively towards that North Star across all of your brands so that at the end of X amount of time, again, we will have measurable outcomes and we can actually show the impact of these efforts. And that has been tremendous throughout our, our brands and connected to, again, all of our goals and our mission. For us, it's also about the research of it all. That's the research kind of geek in me, and making sure that, we produce the content, but it's the education of it all. And so we've had some extensive work that we've done on ensuring that even the most kind of vulnerable communities, even within our children, that they have the tools and metrics that they need to have conversations around race and equity and unity, that teachers are equipped with what they need to have those conversations with kids. In many ways, it's a new day and having these conversations early on with children around social and racial justice. And so what's the role as a content producer, but also what's the role as an educator, as a media company, to ensure that these conversations are happening within our communities and across ethnicities and demographics?
You better believe you'll hear from consumers and viewers about it if it's not, right?
That's exactly right. It's an expectation for sure.
Yeah. And just finally, I wanted to get all of your takes, Celia. I wanted to start with you. You've been doing this work for some time. How do you ensure, or are you confident that this is not just a moment in time and this is actually a turning point for companies really being involved and active in social justice issues? How do you ensure that this continues even past the pandemic and past this moment that we're in?
I think that that's something that organizations like mine need to put work into. Like it's ours to lose at this point. Businesses are with us, and we're working really hard to keep them with us. I think that there has been a shift in consumer expectations, which means that showing good progress on social justice issues is a good thing, which means that businesses are highly motivated to do it. Kind of profit and purpose are aligned, which actually for an organization like mine is the destination. Like this is where we're very happy that we're at this point, that profit and purpose are aligned. But I do think that we need to put in this work. Organizations like mine need to be making it easy for businesses to engage, doing that education work and showing the path forward and kind of making the number of businesses that would like to act equal to the businesses that are acting, because we, from the campaign level, are reaching out, we're welcoming, we're showing them where we need them, how we need them, and we're doing that in a highly organized and very, very strategic way. And we're respectful of the fact that businesses aren't going to give us 100% of their time. They're given a small portion of their time, and it's up to us to use it very, very wisely and in exactly the right place.
And Chris, I'd love to get your take too. Ben & Jerry's being on Instagram. What's sort of the next evolution? How do you continue the momentum?
Yeah, I mean, this genie doesn't go back in the bottle. The expectation that corporations are going to be a part of these issues is only going to grow. I think for us, we'll continue to stay focused on, sort of using these tools that we have to putting them in service of our progressive partners and allies, focused on advancing systemic change, really addressing the root causes of issues that our society wrestles with. And I think, corporations and brands are going to have to make a choice. I think you can either lean into this work, of your own volition, or I think you run the risk of being pulled into it. We saw what happened to corporations in Georgia that had committed to these issues of DEI internally, but were silent in the face of these sort of very regressive voting rights laws. Campaigners understand that there's a contradiction between these things, and they focused on corporations. And so I think campaigners understand that this is now a tool in their toolbox, and so we'll see more of this, not less.
Crystal, I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sophistication is high, and so the expectation level is high, and it's important for us to ensure that there is intentionality in every single thing that we do. Sure, a lot of our companies have been doing a lot of this stuff for a long time. Has it been enough? No. And so it's time to get a lot more intentional. Time to get a lot more calculated and measured around the things that we're doing to ensure that we're not just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff,
Hmm.
but to ensure that we're doing it again against the outcomes that we are looking for and that we actually do shift societal bias. And I think collectively and collaboratively, we can do that across sectors, but it's going to require a real commitment financially and just morally from companies that we cannot deny any further.